Okay. So, committee has not started yet. I imagine it won't be more than a couple minutes late. While we wait for committee to start up, let's listen into what the House is doing. Unfortunately, we ended up on this balloon head who doesn't comb his hair, but let's watch this for a few minutes while we wait for committee to start.
Has done, I think people would get a better understanding and appreciation in terms of who really understands the needs and the housing-related issues as a leader. Yesterday, we were entertained with a conservative idea. They don't have very many of them, but we had one that floated to the top yesterday. It's a rare occurrence. And what they're saying now is that if you buy a house, $900,000, let's say, you're going to be able to not have to pay the GST on that house. That's their gift to the housing situation that Canada is facing today.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
At the same time, the leader of the Conservative Party says, not only are we giving that as a gift to Canadians, we're also going to be cutting back on other federal programs.
You know, because we don't want to listen to this guy. That's actually a good point, Jody. I just saw a clip from Jordan Peterson's recent podcast, and I'd like to show it. I think it's a really good idea. We can watch that for a sec. I'm trying to find the clip. Give me 1 second. It's actually a really good clip of him, of the witness talking about, or the interviewer talking about Justin Trudeau. I saw it on X.
They timed it.
No, that's not it. Great, now I can't find the clip. Oh, here it is. I found it.
The PhD work that I'm doing right now on motivated cognition
really
and understanding what motivates people.
Let me turn that down a bit.
Has driven me into the PhD work that I'm doing right now on motivated cognition and understanding what motivates people, you know, their self-appraisal, their self-enhancement, their self-verification. It was really in that moment seeing that everything that needed to align for Justin Trudeau at that moment needed to feed into his feelings or his motivation on self, what he felt about himself. And I came in and within that first 15 minutes of a meeting said, no, I'm not just going to arbitrarily fall into what you deem to be your methodology around your self-enhancement. That is not my role. My role is to represent the people of Whitby. My role is to make sure that we execute a mandate. And I didn't know that at the time, but it really spoke to the fact.
Didn't know what?
I didn't know at the time that probably that wasn't the best move to make, because I assumed that as his parliamentary secretary, as his right-hand person, that he would have wanted someone who was going to be honest. And I don't think that's what he wanted. He wanted someone to confirm a bias that he felt about himself or a lack of self-esteem that he felt about himself by saying, yes, I trust your judgment, Justin. I don't know you, but I'm going to say, yes, I trust you. I could have played that game. I didn't want to.
Okay, so that's just a clip there. And if you guys want to watch the whole thing, I'm pretty sure it's on Jordan Peterson, on Jordan Peterson's YouTube channel. So I know a couple people in the chat have mentioned that.
The issue of affordable housing.
Someone just asked about if they're still on SDTC. Yes, they still are. The thing is, before that motion was put up, there was a couple other motions as well, and they're allowed to debate those motions, just no new motions can be tabled. So there's still other motions being debated in the House, but SDTC is stopping new ones from coming up. So just to clarify that there.
I could not believe when you take a look at Newswatch and you become very much familiar with a number of the members of the Conservative caucus that disagree, at least by writing the Minister of Housing, with what it is that the Conservative leader is saying himself. When you start getting letters from Conservatives asking for additional, in essence, additional support on the housing file and appealing to the Minister of Housing for support on an initiative in the riding, and I applaud those members, Mr. Speaker. They're doing what it is that they should be doing, advocating for their constituents, even though their leader is advocating to get rid of the program. I find that there's something odd about that. You know, I know there's at least 5, and I understand there's even more potentially there, Mr. Speaker. You know, the member from Lambton, Kent,
All right.
Middlesex.
We don't have to listen to this Yahoo anymore. Committee is starting. There we go. Kevin is a mega whiner. He is a strange MP, and he doesn't brush his hair. Oh no, Khalid's in committee. And Miss Yip.
Good
Miss Yippity Yip.
afternoon.
Guys, Brock
Welcome to this meeting
is in.
of the Standing
Cooper's
House
in.
of Commons Committee
This is
on
gonna be
Public
good.
Accounts.
Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to remain cognizant of the rules surrounding the earpieces, and when not using the earpiece, to put it on one of the stickers to your left or right. These measures are in place to prevent audio feedback incidents. And a reminder to all those in person and online that for the safety of our interpreters, that it is very important that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. Merci à tous pour la coopération.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Comment should be addressed to the chair. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee is continuing its study on Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, the 2024 reports 5 to 7 of the Auditor General of Canada.
Welcome our witness who is returning as an individual, Mr. Navdeep Bains. Mr. Bains, you do have time for an opening comments, up to 5 minutes if you'd like to take it. The floor is yours.
How many times is he going to tell us that it's an arm's length
Thank you very
organization?
much, Mr. Chair. Bonjour tout le monde. Monsieur le Président, at your
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chair.
I've made at your request, I've made myself available today for a third appearance at committee to answer questions about Sustainable Development Technology Canada. I'm happy to be here and answer your questions as best I can. At my last appearance at this committee, there were a number of questions, and I want to open today where we left off. Members posed a question regarding a phone call between Ms. Verschern and I prior to her appointment. I do not recall such a conversation taking place. But as I explained last time at committee, it was not uncommon for me to speak to prospective candidates during a selection process or to encourage candidates to apply for positions. Sometimes I encouraged multiple people for the same position. Canadians and our government always benefited from open, transparent, and a highly competitive appointment process. Members also posed questions with respect to the candidates that were recommended to me via a PCO advice letter. As I said in my previous testimony, I've made over 100 governor and council appointment recommendations as a minister. And I do not recall, after several years, who applied for specific positions at that time. Assuming there were multiple people recommended for each position, this could be in excess of 400 names recommended to me during my tenure, all of which occurred more than 4 years ago. Members also offered a line of questioning regarding the former Sustainable Development Technology Canada employee, Amber Batul. At CIBC, Ms. Batul worked at Capital Markets and supported the team, including myself. I do not recall meeting Ms. Batul before she started at CIBC. In fact, the only reason I know we had ever met or crossed paths is because during the interview process, Ms. Batul stated that we had met a few times beforehand, something I did not recall at that time. It is important to note that Ms. Batul went through a rigorous process consistent with CIBC HR policies. Finally, I would like to address a line of questioning by a few parties with respect to this appointment. At the time of appointment, Ms. Verschoren's credentials were impeccable. She was a Canadian business leader and served Prime Minister Harper, Minister Flaherty, and Minister Paradis in various capacities. As I've stated before, Sustainable Development Technology Canada is an arm's-length organization.
Oh, here we go.
My role as minister was to appoint 7 of the 15 board members. It was not to oversee the day-to-day operations of the organization, nor was it to manage the board. As an arm's-length organization, it was the board's responsibility to manage their conflicts of interest, as is the case with all designated public office holders, and follow the rules and process, something the Auditor General has identified did not happen. As this is my 3rd appearance at committee on this matter, I would like to request that if after my appearance, there are any additional questions the committee has, I would be more than happy to answer them in writing. I look forward to answering your questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Bains. Appreciate that. I'm going to begin to open up our first round, which is 4 members with
give it to
6
Brock right
minutes
away.
each. And Mr. Perkins will lead us
Perkins
off.
is
You
good
have the
too.
floor for 6 minutes, please.
I'm fine with Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, former Liberal Minister Bains, for coming back, as you point out, a 3rd time before a parliamentary committee on the issue of SDTC, the Liberal Green Slush Fund. You're obviously aware that this committee did not feel at the end of the last meeting, or at least a majority of the members, that you were actually making an attempt to answer the questions. And we had a long discussion about whether our privilege was breached. And we've decided, on the suggestion of a number of members, to give you another shot and see how it goes today. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask some similar questions to what I did before, and I appreciate your opening statement. But before I ask those, I just want to get a clarification. You work at Rogers currently. Could you explain to me what your title and role is, please?
Thank you very much again, Chair, for the opportunity to speak here today. As I've indicated, the topic that I was asked to speak on was Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and look forward to answering questions pertaining to that topic.
So here's the first answer. Very simple question that you didn't answer.
Yeah, just hold on, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Bains, you're saying you can't provide your current employment title and location? I mean, that does seem a bit, well, unusual. I suspect it's in the public domain, and
it is in the public domain, Mr. Chair. And I look forward to answering questions pertaining to the topic of Sustainable Development Technology Canada today.
All right, Mr. Bains, I don't know how this is going to go. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor. You have 5 minutes left.
So I'll take that you've refused to answer the question about what you do for a living. The first
Point of order,
refusal.
Chair.
Oh my God, point of order already from Khalid.
I have a point of order, Mr. Perkins. Yes, Ms. Khalid?
On relevance, I think that Mr. Bains has made himself available and clear that he is willing and able to answer questions relating to SDTC. And I would encourage all members on this committee to restrict their questions to that.
Well, but Ms. Khalid, now, as you know, I give members latitude. That seemed like a pretty easy bunt. To give a place of location, but I'm not going to belabor it. We're going to turn things back over to Mr. Perkins
On the same point of order,
Mr. Durant. Yes.
Just can you explain to me how this is relevant to SDTC, how Rogers and SDTC are connected?
I just think it's kind of.
If you think that it's relevant, then say it.
Oh, I just think it's a courtesy to state where, in fact, someone works. I don't see it as being anywhere remotely out of bound. But look, I think
courtesy and relevance are two different matters, Mr. Chair. So it's just it can be a courtesy. Mr. Perkins, no, he can Google really quickly.
All right, it seems combative right off the bat to refuse to answer a question that is in the public domain. But Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2 refusals. So I'll move on. You mentioned the phone calls to Net Pasharin. As you know, I asked you this question before, and in your opening statement, you said you didn't recall, which is what you said before. It's hard for me to believe that you don't recall. The former president of SDTC testified before a committee that you called her twice. So I will ask you, as I did last time, did you call her twice, yes or no?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak to this. I've answered this question before, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to answer it again.
Oh, my God.
As I stated in my opening remarks, I made over 100 governor and council appointments, and I don't recall any specific conversation with Ms. Verschuren. As I've indicated, she did apply through the new appointments process, then her name was recommended to me.
So you don't recall that you were warned both by officials and by the president as well, and I've asked this question before, that she had a conflict of interest and shouldn't be appointed. You don't recall that either?
Thank you very much again for that question. And again, I want to answer this for I think the 3rd or 4th time, and I look forward to providing a detailed answer, which is to say that the core issue here is public office holders must respect the obligations they have to conduct themselves in a manner that respects the Conflict of Interest Act. That applies to Ms. Verschuren and all public office holders.
Answers in a row. I'll ask the next question that I asked before. Do you recall seeking $750 million of taxpayer money for the Green Slush Fund from Cabinet when you were minister? Yes or no?
Again, thank you very much, Chair. As I mentioned last time in my testimony, as I've indicated on a number of occasions, the answer to that question is that all amounts that were allocated to Sustainable Development Technology Canada were debated and presented in the House of Commons and approved by Parliament.
So that's another non-answer. Again, it's a simple question. Did you seek $750 million from Cabinet, which was eventually approved by Cabinet? As a minister responsible for SDTC, did you seek that money? Yes or no? It would be difficult for me to believe that you don't remember seeking almost $1 billion for the Liberal Green Slush Fund.
I think the members answered that question, that there was a process of how these funds were allocated.
Another refusal to answer. In the 48 times that Stephen Guilbeault lobbied PMO with meetings with Gerald Butts, you and your office in the 5 years that you were minister, and he was lobbying between 2016 and 2019. Do you recall any of those meetings when Stephen Guilbeault and Gerald Butts and you were talking about Sustainable Development Technology Canada? Yes or no?
The answer to your question is anyone that has any official engagement with the government that is properly registered, and the Sustainable Development Technology Canada is an arm's length organization. They make independent decisions on how to allocate the funds, and they work with management on a day-to-day basis to address these issues, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, I cannot hear. I apologize. Sorry, I couldn't hear there. My apologies.
That's 7 non-answers in a row. This is what led to the privilege discussion last time. So I'll ask another question that I've asked of you. Why did you think it was appropriate to appoint a chair of the board, the first one in the history of SDTC, that had a conflict and was doing business with SDTC before you appointed her?
Mr. Chair, I've been answering the questions, and I look forward to answering this question as well. It's important that I provide the answers to the member because of the work that they do is important. Ms. Verschuren's credentials were well known. Her announcement was made public. She was appointed by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, a former Finance Minister, Minister Flaherty, and former Industry Minister Christian Parody as well.
That wasn't the
And
question.
as the PCO official said in her testimony, that she was vetted.
As someone who made over 100 GIC appointments, was it your regular practice to appoint people to GIC appointments who had already been doing business with that organization? Was that your normal way of doing business as a Minister of the Crown?
Again, to answer that question in greater detail, it's important to note that all the individuals that applied to different roles or positions needed to go through the new appointment process. These names were recommended to me by PCO, and then I made a Governor and Council recommendation.
Thank you.
That's 10 non-answers.
Thank you very much. Up next is Ms. Yip. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Oh, not Miss Yippity Yip Yip.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bains, for coming again. Mr. Bains, I'm looking for some clarity with the motion that brought you here today. The committee invited you here given it felt there were contradictions between your testimony and that of Ms. Verschuren, given that she had stated at the industry committee that she had not applied for the position. In their correspondence on October 4th to this committee, PCO confirms that Ms. Verschuren did in fact apply to the position. In addition, I understand that Ms. Verschuren, through her lawyers, wrote to the industry committee to correct the record and that she had in fact applied to the position. Is it your understanding that she applied to the position?
I appreciate the opportunity to answer that question as well. I've indicated in my previous remarks when I was at committee last time as well, and it was confirmed by testimony given by the Privy Council official that Ms. Verschuren did apply. She did go through the new appointments process, a process that ultimately saw over 100 people apply, is my understanding, based on the testimony provided by the PCO official. And her name went through a rigorous process where individuals were vetted, and then ultimately recommendations were made to me for a Governor and Council appointment. And so again, to summarize, she did apply, and ultimately that name was recommended to me along with other names, and then I made a Governor and Council recommendation.
PCO has stated that it is customary for departments to reach out to stakeholders and meritorious individuals to share the word about positions like that of the SDTC chairperson, and that ministers and departments would typically look to share the word with as many people as possible. Is that your understanding too?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. It was very common for a number of people, including myself, to encourage as many Canadians as possible to apply because this was a new process. It was open to all Canadians, and we wanted to have more, not less, options. And it wasn't uncommon for me to ask multiple people to apply for the same role because it's critical that we had Canadians engaged in this new merit-based process that was open and transparent.
Yeah, right.
Could you speak to the new process at that time?
So what I recall, Mr. Chair, in 2016, a new process was established, regardless if you had a position or you were applying for that same position or you were applying to a new position, that you needed to go through this process where you would fill out, I believe, and answer a bunch of questions. They would then determine who would be vetted and ultimately interviewed, and then recommendations were made to the respective ministers that were responsible for those portfolios.
When PCO first published the appointment opening online in September 2018, did your department subsequently send a blast email to stakeholders?
I don't know, Mr. Chair, if a blast email was sent, but I do think it's important to note that every effort was taken, from what I recollect during my tenure, to encourage as many people to apply. And as I've stated, the PCO official in her remarks at this committee indicated that over 100 people did apply.
So you're not sure how the position was advertised?
Oh, the advertisement of the position was public. I thought you were saying that where stakeholders sent a blast. Yeah, no, that was the positions are very public. They were advertised. They were open to everyone. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. So Ms. Verschuren was no stranger to the department. Is that correct?
My understanding is, and as I've said before, she was well regarded by the previous administration and government for the work that she had done in the private sector as well as the public sector. She was appointed by Stephen Harper, Minister Flaherty, and Minister Parody, and one of those appointments was for an advisory role on science, technology, and I believe innovation council at ISED.
And she had previously served since 2017 on the Clean Tech Strategy table set up by your department. Is that correct?
She played a number, I believe, of different roles in working with government officials going back to Stephen Harper's tenure. That is correct.
Oh, well, this is the first time I've heard that she also had participated in an advisory role for Minister Paradine. Is that correct?
Yeah, to the best of my recollection, Mr. Chair, she had several appointments that were made by the previous Conservative government, economic advisory, supporting the work at ISED, etc. And so I believe I provided that information, who appointed her in what year, in my testimony last time I spoke here at committee. And again, I'm willing to provide any answers in writing if the member wants.
Yeah, and I apologize. I believe the correct pronunciation of the name is former Minister Parody.
Christian Parody, that is my understanding as well, correct.
Okay.
And that is about your time,
all right.
Ms. Ship.
Thank you
very much. Suivant.
Now we have Ms. Sigler-Gagné for 6 minutes. Now, before you get started, Mr. Bains, I'm speaking French now. Can you hear me in English? You can hear me okay? Everything's working?
That's this guy.
Ms. Sigler-Gagné, 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you, Mr. Bains, for making yourself available to appear before the committee today. It's highly appreciated. I hope that I'll get answers to my questions this time round. First, right off the bat, you said that you didn't remember meeting Ms. Batul when you were Minister and she was Chief of Staff at STDC. Is that correct?
Merci beaucoup pour votre...
Thank you very much for your question.
As I stated in my opening remarks, I didn't recall meeting Ms. Batul. And as I stated in the last time I was here, maybe once or twice I met her at some public events. And that was really a function of the conversation I had with her when she was applying for the role at CIBC, as I mentioned in my opening statements.
Donc, avez-vous eu un rôle à jouer?
So did you have any role to play in her recruitment to the CIBC?
As I stated in my opening remarks, I was one of a number of people that did interview her for that role at CIBC.
Parce que Mme Lawrence, dans son témoignage...
Ms. Lawrence, in her testimony back in January, mentioned that there were 2 individuals, including Ms. Batul, who were in direct contact with your cabinet when you were minister. Is that correct? Were you aware of that?
No, I was not aware of that.
Au courant donc des...
So you weren't aware of meetings that took place with your cabinet to do with SDTC? So your staff was working on the one side without informing you of what they were doing. Is that correct?
No, just to clarify, you were asking if I knew if Ms. Batul was engaged with my staff. I don't recall having any meeting with her, and I don't recall my staff telling me who they were engaging with at SDTC.
Donc,
So therefore, the fact that Ms. Batul regularly informed your staff of what was happening at SDDC, you never got wind of that?
No, as I indicated, I had no meeting or contact with her to my recollection.
D'accord. Je vais faire un petit...
I see. Let me just sum up a couple of things that occurred whilst you were Minister of Industry. And of course, the umbrella organisation STTC. In 2019, the green stream of STTC was instituted. It was confidential. You could apply online. But however, it never did, in fact, appear online. And your department informed STTC that it did not comply with the framework agreement of STTC. So your department, in fact, told STTC of that important fact. Were you aware of that fact that was transmitted by your department to STTC at the time?
No, I don't recall that.
I'll continue. COVID payments 2020-2021. Your department was aware of conflicts of interest declared by members of the board because your staff had access to the minutes, and in the minutes it was evident that a lot of the board members did not recuse themselves when they themselves declared that they had conflicts of interest. Your department received the minutes. Did you ever get wind of that?
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Thank you very much for your question.
And to answer that question specifically, I did not receive any such information.
Parfait.
Perfect. Were you aware that STTC Canada, which fell under your purview, had no conflict of interest registry and was blindly trusting their members and treating conflict of interest declarations on a case-by-case basis? And in 2021, did STTC actually set up a registry for conflict of interest after your departure, that is?
To your point, through you to the chair, they may have set up a registry. As I stated in my opening remarks, the onus is on the board members to make sure that they follow the Conflict of Interest Act, is my understanding.
Ce qui a d'ailleurs.
So that was of great concern to our committee because there were 14 cases of conflict of interest raised by the Auditor General between 2017 and 2020, i.e. when you were Minister during your tenure. Did that surprise you, any of that, when you read the Auditor General's report?
It's very important to note that I respect the work of the AG, and these findings are very important. And I think we all are here to talk about these important matters.
D'accord. Je vous demande si ça vous a surpris.
I see. I'm asking you if you were surprised because you were telling us that you weren't aware of the discussions that your own staff was having with the senior officials at STTC. You weren't even aware that there was a conflict of interest registry. You weren't aware that directors on the board didn't recuse themselves from their own meetings when they declared they themselves had conflicts of interest. You weren't aware that there was a quasi-secret stream that was set up to fund businesses and companies that also had conflicts of interest vis-à-vis the members. What were you aware of? Did you manage anything whatsoever in your role as Minister?
Thank you very much for that question. As I indicated, this is an arm's-length organization, and my responsibility as a minister was to appoint 7 of the 15 members. And as I've indicated on several occasions, I think it's really important to note that the members on the board conduct themselves in a manner that respects the obligations they have to follow the Conflict of Interest Act.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup. Up next is Mr. Canning. Mr. Canning, I haven't had a chance to formally welcome you to the committee. I was going to take note of that the other day, but you were swapped out. So welcome to Public Accounts. We look forward to having you here. And you now have 6 minutes, please.
Oh, no, not this, Grandpa.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Bains, for being with us, at least virtually today. As the Chair just mentioned, I'm new on this committee, so forgive me if I may sort of take a sort of higher elevation look at this because I don't know a lot of the details in this file. But, you know, obviously at the heart of this is an Auditor General's report that had findings of mismanagement, lack of proper board oversight, and obviously conflicts of interest within STTC. First of all, I mean, do you accept those findings of the Auditor General's report? That question was asked perhaps in a different way just now, but do you accept those findings?
Thank you for that question. Mr. Chair, as I've indicated, I very much respect the work of the Auditor General. and the findings that were presented.
Okay, I mean, now in your role as minister, your role in this, in the food chain, as it will. Sorry, I'm an ecologist, so I think in those terms. But one of your main roles is to make sure that the act that is behind all this is adhered to. And one of your roles under that act is in filling board appointments. You mentioned that you signed off on the board appointments. I believe you said the recommendations came from the PCO, and then you recommended them to cabinet where they were approved. I understand that there were I'm not so much talking about the initial appointments now, but there were times when board members left the board and there was many vacancies, and that went on for some time. From my own experience, I've sat on a couple of cabinet-appointed boards and administrative tribunals, and there always seems to be these issues around ministerial appointments taking forever. I'm just wondering if you were aware of those absences from the board, or openings, and why they weren't filled at a time when it seems there was a real need to have board action to do a lot of important things, and yet there were very few board members there. I'm just wondering if you can speak to that. This was your role. Under the Act, you were supposed to fill those appointments, make those appointments to fill those positions.
Again, I appreciate the opportunity to answer that question. And you're absolutely correct that the minister is responsible to appoint 7 of the 15 board members. That process was undertaken. The appointments were made. The remaining are done independently, but 7 of the 15 are the responsibility of the Minister of ISED, and I did do that.
But from my understanding, there were times when the numbers of board members, even ones that you were responsible for, were left open for periods of time, which I find troubling. And I just want to now turn to the conflict of interest situation. When I was on a couple of administrative tribunal boards, we were given lessons from judges about what conflict of interest was to make sure that we didn't act in a conflict of interest. And as I recall, the test for conflict of interest is not so much whether I was going to make any money or any benefit. It was the public perception of that conflict. What the person on the street would think. You'd say, if this person was appointed to this role and they already was doing this and they had company doing that, what would the person on the street think? And it would strike me, in many of these cases, that perception would be there was definitely a conflict of interest here. And I'm just wondering how you can explain that this got through the PCO, yourself, and cabinet without someone saying, hey, maybe we should appoint someone who's good in financial markets and things like that, but doesn't have positions directly related to the fund that we're talking about.
Again, thank you very much for the question. As I've answered before, the vetting was done based on the person's credentials, recognizing that if any such conflicts existed, that the onus is on the individuals to seek the appropriate advice. And my understanding, based on the testimony provided by Ms. Verschuren, she did reach out to the Ethics Commissioner to get advice. And then ultimately, this recommendation was made. I also believe it's important that, as you say, when individuals are on the board, that they, along with other public office holders, hold themselves to the highest possible standard when it comes to dealing with conflicts of interest. And I think that's the key takeaway here.
I'll leave it there for now. I'll come back to you later.
Thank you. I'll give you time back to you later then. Beginning our second round, which consists of 6 members with various times. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Former Liberal Minister Bains, you continue to be less than forthcoming about your active involvement in hand-picking, conflict-ridden Annette Verschaeren as chair of SDTC. You have repeatedly represented that you got a recommendation from PCO, and it was only thereafter that you made the decision to appoint Ms. Verschaeren, as if your role was passive, but that isn't true, and you know it not to be true. You received a list of 5 recommended candidates from PCO in March of 2019. You ignored that list, and in April of 2019, you contacted Ms. Verschaeren and asked her to apply for the role. It was only thereafter that Ms. Verschaeren applied. It wasn't PCO that reached out to her. It was you, and that is detailed in the Ethics Commissioner's report. So why do you continue to mislead committee?
Thank you very much for the question. As I've indicated, these names were recommended by PCO. They went through the vetting process. As the PCO official has indicated, over 100 people applied. And so this was open to everyone. And this was a process that people could...
Former Liberal Minister Bains, you hand-picked her. That is established in your misleading committee, and that's now very clear, just as you continue to not answer questions. So I'll move on. Who asked you to contact Ms. Verschaeren to apply as chair of the Green Slush Fund? Who was it who called you to tap her on the shoulder? Was it someone in the PMO?
To answer that question, as I stated in my opening remarks, I don't recall any such conversations, but it's not uncommon for me to speak with multiple people, even for the same role, to apply. And as the
former Liberal Minister Bains, I'll move on since you can't recall this, you can't recall that. Maybe there is something you will recall, and that is that you knew that Ms. Verschaeren had a conflict of interest in that her company, NR was receiving $12 million in funding from SDTC at the time of her appointment. You knew that, and you appointed her anyway. Isn't that right?
Ms. Verschaeren's credentials were well known. All that information.
Former Liberal Minister Bains, I didn't ask about Ms. Verschaeren's credentials. I asked you whether you knew that she had a conflict of interest at the time, but you made the decision to appoint her. Yes or no?
As I've stated, Ms. Verschaeren went through the vetting process. Her name was recommended.
Liberal Minister Bains, I asked you a yes or no question. Did you know that she had a conflict of interest at the time that you appointed her as chair of SDTC?
Point of
yes
order.
Or no?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
I have a point of order, Mr. Cooper. Yes, Ms. Khalid.
On two separate points. The first is with respect to respect of witnesses as they come before our committee. I've heard the member opposite say a lot of interesting things and pose a question that he thinks is a question or is actually a statement, and not allowing the witness to answer the question.
And your second point, Ms. Khalid?
Is on relevance, Chair.
Well, okay. I mean, as I've said, with some back and forth, members and courtesy, members are entitled to try to press witnesses for more specific answers, something Mr. Cooper's doing, and I think we're here today to answer these questions, so I'm not sure the relevance. But look, again, this is going well in that members are being allotted time, and Mr. Bains is providing answers that some members wish to probe further. So, Mr. Cooper, you've got just under 2 minutes left.
It's a yes or no question, former Liberal Minister Bains. Did you know that she had a conflict of interest at the time of her appointment? Yes or no?
Yes or no?
Again, these names were presented to me. They went through the vetting process. And based on that, I made a recommendation.
Liberal Minister Bains, your amnesia is unacceptable. Ms. Verschaeren said that she spoke to you.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes, Ms. Khalid.
That's quite disrespectful, Chair.
Ms. Khalid, I did anticipate this meeting would be a little bumpy because we're dealing with a former official who I'm certainly glad has appeared today. Mr. Bains is not unfamiliar with the push and pull of this place, so I am confident he's going to be able to respond to Mr. Cooper. And I'm not.
On that same point, Chair?
I'm not worried about Mr. Bains' ability here. But yes,
on that same point, Chair, it's not about whether a witness is able to handle rudeness or not. It is the conduct of our committee that concerns me. And in public accounts, I would prefer that we are respectful to anybody and everybody, whether we agree with them or disagree with them, that come before our committee, to be respectful regardless.
But Ms. Khalid, you would agree there's lots of testimony out there that is contradictory, and members, I think on both sides, are pressing as hard as they can for clarity, or as Mr. Duran likes to say, truth. So I'll turn things back over to Mr. Cooper for a minute and a half.
Cooper, your mic's muted. Cooper, your mic's off.
I apologize. I cannot hear the question.
Oh, just 1 second. The witness could not hear you. So if you could turn your microphone on, and I will give you your time back at a minute and a half. Go ahead, please.
Former Liberal Minister Bains, the Ethics Commissioner's report says that Ms. Verscheren specifically raised the fact that she had a conflict of interest with you. Are you claiming you don't recall that Ms. Verscheren raised that with you?
Again, Mr. Chair, I've answered that question a number of times. I've been crystal clear that the names that were recommended to me went through a vetting process. Again, that's the answer provided.
I asked you, do you not recall that conversation? Do you not recall that Leah Lawrence, the former CEO of the Green Slush Fund, spoke to officials in your office, and that the manager of communications and projects at SDTC also informed your office of Ms. Verscheren's conflict? Do you not recall any of that? Did none of that get to you? Is that what you're trying to represent?
Again, Mr. Chair, as I said in my opening remarks, I don't recall having such conversations, but it wouldn't be uncommon for me to encourage multiple people to apply for roles. I think it's important to note.
I would put it to you, former Liberal Minister Bains, that you knew full well that Ms. Verscheren had a conflict of interest, and you simply didn't care. And as a result, you appointed someone who was conflict-ridden, and that set a culture of conflict that led to conflict after conflict, mismanagement and corruption at SDTC, chronicled in the Auditor General's report. So
thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Any responsibility for that, those damning
I'm afraid that is your time, Mr. Cooper. I will come back to you. Mr. Duran, you have the floor, please, for 5 minutes now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we've certainly spoken a lot about amnesia, and I'm hoping that they spent Wednesday morning, the official opposition spent Wednesday morning reminding their leader where those 6 homes were built, because we're still waiting for the answer, but I welcome the criticism.
Point of order, this isn't on STCC.
Mr. Bains, I do want to ask a question, because the opposition is trying to paint a picture where you were personally involved in the minutiae of SDTC. You personally nominated 7 candidates, so a minority on the board. So there's 15 that are not nominated by a GIC, so it has nothing to do with politics, but 7 of them. And that somehow, if you wanted to really control the committee, you would appoint somebody that was appointed by former Conservative Minister Parody and former Conservative Minister Flaherty, who I respect, and former Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper. If you were trying to pull out a big Liberal scheme, would you appoint former Conservative candidates to this board?
What?
Again, I'd like to, Chair, thank the member for the question. And to answer that question, I think it's important to note that Ms. Verscheren's name went through a process that was led by PCO. And the points highlighted by the member speak to her credentials, her work in government, regardless of which government she served in, we were looking for a person that had the experience. And she went through that vetting process, and her name was recommended because of that experience she had both in the public and private side. I know members have raised questions about Ms. Verschoeren and her role in different organizations. All that information was public knowledge. People were fully aware of the work she had done in the private sector, in the public sector. And when the chair was announced, there was a press release. This was public knowledge. So this was done with openness, with transparency. This was done as part of the new appointments process. And it was done to engage Canadians across the country. And my understanding, based on the PCO official, was that over 100 individuals applied for this role.
And Mr. Bains, you may not be aware because you weren't, well, obviously you weren't working hard for the next leader of the Conservative Party, but obviously Ms. Verschoeren did the same thing that Mr. Perkins did on the other side. Both donated the same amount to a Conservative candidate. So the idea that this was a Liberal hack connected to Liberals, I can't buy it. I mean, I don't know many Liberals who are donating to the Conservative Party of Canada. But regardless of that, I want to talk about governance. Governance and your daily, you've talked often about SDTC or any government agencies, whether it's the Minister of PSPC, the idea that the Minister of PSPC, for instance, would be involved in daily operations at Canada Post is ridiculous. So how much time did you spend, or did you have any sign-offs on SDTC on a contribution agreement that they would have signed with a potential with a client that they had done business with?
Again, thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to answer that question as well. I've stated on a number of occasions, including in my opening remarks, that Sustainable Development Technology Canada is an arm's length organization. They have an independent board that oversees the day-to-day operations of management. They ultimately determine how the monies will be allocated. This is a decision they make independently. That's how this is structured. And as you've highlighted, Mr. Chair, to the member, is that the minister is responsible for appointing 7 of the 15 board members, but ultimately the board oversees their conduct. And with respect to the whole notion of conflict of interest that's been raised on a number of occasions, I understand the question that's being raised, but the onus is on all public office holders to engage with the ethics commissioner with regards to any real or perceived conflicts of interest. You're the one who appointed her. That is the way many public office holders conduct themselves, and that is my understanding of what Ms. Verschoeren did before she was appointed as chair.
So obviously, Minister, what you're saying is public office holders are not beholden to a government and council appointment or their ministers. They'd be reporting and asking you, Minister, do I have a conflict of interest? Obviously, there's a nonpartisan body that reports to Parliament, and that would be the Ethics Commissioner, and that is the proper way. When you take away the politics, that would be the proper way to govern themselves. And we have, in this case, some members that didn't do that. But I wouldn't expect a minister of the Crown to be responsible for whether or not there is a conflict, making a decision on conflict of interest, right?
Yeah, as I've indicated, it's important to note that if you're a public office holder and you're dealing with either real or perceived conflicts, actually it's the proper practice to engage with the conflict of interest commissioner and ethics commissioner to say, look, this is the situation I'm in. I need advice and feedback and guidance and counsel, and making sure that the proper rules are followed to avoid any conflicts of interest. And that is incumbent upon all public office holders, to the governor and council appointments that I've made, as well as members in this committee and anyone else that serves in the public domain.
Thank you, Mr. Bains. That is the time. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair de Gagné, s'il vous plaît, pour
2.5 minutes, please. Mr. Bains, concerning the COVID payments, please, I'm going to reformulate the question I asked previously. Your department was aware of the conflicts of interests of board members, not only because it had access to the minutes, but because your ADM, Mr. Noseworthy, was in attendance at the board meeting. that approved almost all of the COVID funds. Were you aware of that?
Thank you very much for the question. I do recall during the pandemic that funds were allocated to a number of organizations, including Sustainable Development Technology Canada. And that is the extent that monies were allocated. How they were dispersed was never brought to my attention because, as I indicated, that's a decision the board would make.
Donc, le fait que votre...
So the fact that your ADM was on the board and could attest to the fact that members of the board declared their conflicts of interest but did not recuse themselves, that you never got wind of that fact. The ADM never transmitted that information to you. Perhaps no, they weren't shocked that there was that kind of conduct going on?
The way you presented the question, I did not receive any such information from the ADM regarding the conduct of the board members.
D'accord. Donc, que saviez-vous?
And what were you aware of in terms of how the COVID payments were allocated?
Pour TDDC?
In terms of SDDC, that is.
So, as you've indicated, there was a number of payments made to individuals and organizations during that time period. And in this particular instance, monies were allocated to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and it was designed to support Canadian businesses, Canadian entrepreneurs to deal with this unprecedented crisis. And so this was standard across a number of industries and across a number of regions in Canada.
D'accord. Donc, malgré le...
I see. And so despite the fact, and I quote, that you sent a letter, and I'll quote you, the letter was in English, unfortunately, so I'll read it in English.
Economic Development Canada and SDTC share a strong working relationship, and I look forward to this continued collaboration. Donc, malgré cela...
So despite that, you really weren't aware of how those funds were allocated, even if your ADM attended the meeting, you have no idea whatsoever of how that all played out.
Yeah, the Assistant Deputy Minister reported to the Deputy Minister, nor did the ADM or the DM bring these issues to my attention.
Voilà, merci beaucoup.
That's such a lie.
Suivant.
That's such a lie.
Oui, merci.
Thank you for your question.
Cannings, again, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes,
It's
please.
not even a believable lie.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to continue that kind of line of questioning because, indeed, I was going to talk about Andrew Noseworthy, the ADM of yours that sat in on board meetings. You know, that's quite a high position, an ADM, and so I imagine he must have had some role, some guidance. You claim to have no knowledge of this or something, but the Deputy Minister must have sent him to these meetings with some role in mind, you know. As I say, I've been on cabinet-appointed boards before, 3 of them, and we never had an ADM sit in on our meetings. Now, maybe it's because we didn't have the budget that STTC was dealing with, but I'm sure there must have been some role for Mr. Noseworthy there, even though this is supposedly an arm's-length operation. So was he reporting to the Deputy Minister on what was going on? And was he under direction from the Deputy Minister to provide direction to the board? I'm quite curious about this.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question that the members asked. And the member assessment is accurate, which is the Assistant Deputy Minister does report to the Deputy Minister. So my interactions with the Assistant Deputy Minister was fairly limited, and no such issues were raised that's been asked before with pertaining to the conflicts of interest.
So did the Deputy Minister bring it to your attention that, these decisions were being made? Maybe board members were stepping out of the room when a vote was taken regarding something that they might have a financial interest in, but it sounds like they weren't recusing themselves from the actual discussion around that, but just recusing themselves for the vote. I'm just wondering, if what the Auditor General has said is true, and you say you more or less accept that, I believe, then I would assume the Deputy Minister and the Assistant Deputy Minister would have been concerned with how things were transpiring in this in the board meetings.
Yeah, no such issues were brought to my attention, as I indicated, and my understanding was that all the board members would conduct themselves in a manner that was consistent with the obligations they had to respect how to deal with conflicts of interest. But these issues were never brought to my attention.
Brief question? No, very good. Thank you very much. Turning now to Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Brockinator, let's go.
And just before that, Mr. Bains, if you're able, and I know you're answering a lot of questions in between, if you could put your microphone on mute. I know that can be difficult when you're going back and forth, but in particular, if you do touch or adjust your headset, you can put it on mute, because it does make a feedback signal which can interfere with the and even potentially harm the interpreter. So if you would do your best on that, please. But in particular, if you find you have to adjust your headset, please mute it. And if you can mute it when you're not answering questions, that'd be appreciated as well.
Understood, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the couple of times I did that was because I was having difficulty hearing the question. Yeah. But I appreciate the feedback, and I will mute it. Yeah, and no problem. If you want to just pause for 10 seconds, that's no problem as well. So, and do you know how to mute your mic? I should ask that as well before we proceed. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
You would not be the first who does not. So it's one of those things that I just want to double check. Thank you. Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
All right, Brockinator.
Thank you, Chair. Former Minister, Liberal Minister Bains, I'm going to follow up on a question put to you by my colleague, Mr. Cooper, where he not only didn't get the question out, but we didn't receive a response. And the question, to refresh your memory, Minister, was, did you take or do you take any former ministerial responsibility for the gross breach of trust and the misuse of almost $400 million of taxpayer money?
As I've indicated, it's important that ministers act in the best interest of Canadians and conduct themselves accordingly.
Minister, do you take responsibility? Under your watch. This was under your watch. Do you take responsibility? Canadians want to know.
Again, I'm answering the question. I keep on getting interrupted. As I've indicated, it's important that I advance what's in Canadians' best interest, and it's important that the policies are set in a manner, and as well.
So the answer is, so thank you. The answer is no. You take no responsibility, which is really a hallmark of the Justin Trudeau government, particularly his ministers, current and former. Now, on the issue of misuse of taxpayer monies, you didn't want to answer the question put to you by Mr. Perkins. Your role at Rogers is one of Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. Under Justin Trudeau's government since 2015, Rogers Communications Canada, one of the largest telco companies in the world, has received a whopping $173,954,991 in taxpayer grants and contributions.
Why?
So
they make so much money. Why do they need grants?
Now, Mr. Bains, I understand that you were in Ottawa this past weekend.
Mr. Brock, I have a point of order, yes.
Just the relevance of Mr. Brock's statements.
I think he was just reading into the record some numbers. And
oh, come on, yep.
It's relevant to Canadians, so I'll move on.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. You've got 3 minutes.
Now, former Liberal Minister Bains, you were in Ottawa this past Sunday. When did you leave Ottawa?
I left Ottawa yesterday.
Okay, and while you were in Ottawa for approximately 3 days, did you meet with any government officials, elected or non-elected?
Yes, I did.
And who did you meet with?
I met with my former colleagues, Mark Holland, Gary Nandasangri, and Omar Algabra. We were celebrating Mark Holland's 50th birthday.
Okay. Did you meet with any non-elected officials?
I met with the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, Katie Telford, and Andrew Bevan.
Okay. And meeting with Katie Telford and Andrew Bevan, did you discuss the content of your testimony today?
Yes, he did.
No, I did not.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
Were you provided any material from Katie Telford or Andrew Bevan or any other non-elected official or elected official to refresh your memory with respect to evidence that you're giving today?
No, I did not receive such information.
This is now your third appearance at this particular committee to discuss your involvement in the SDTC Green Slush Fund. Are you to inform this committee and Canadians that given the passage of time, you were not provided, nor did you seek any material to aid you in the recollection of important details with respect to your failed ministerial responsibilities to SDTC? Is that what you want this committee and Canadians to believe?
If, just to clarify, you're referring to my trip to Ottawa?
I'm talking about through all the times that you've appeared, not just your recent 3-day sojourn in Ottawa. I'm talking about in advance of all of your appearances. Have you not received or have you not sought out material to aid you in your testifying?
No, the information that exists is in the public domain with the Auditor General's report, for example.
We have learned in the past former government officials have been paid with taxpayer dollars to prepare for upcoming committee meetings, even while they were being briefed by government officials. Former Liberal Minister Bains, has the government paid you in any capacity to be here today and the former 2 appearances at this particular committee?
Could you repeat that again?
How much has the government paid you, sir, for your time testifying today, preparing for today, and the other 2 appearances at this committee? How much? Just the number, please.
0.
Thank you. That is the time. And just for the record, I didn't correct this earlier because I know Mr. Bains is aware. This is Mr. Bains' second appearance at this committee. He's also appeared at another parliamentary committee. Mr. Erskine-Smith, you have the floor now for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much. So Mr. Cooper referred to the Ethics Commissioner's report. I think it's useful, Mr. Bains, to go over that a little bit because at one paragraph in relation to Ms. Verschern's appointment to the board of STTC, this is what it says. Ms. Verschern was contacted by staff in the Office of the Minister of ISED in April 2019 to discuss the possibility of being appointed as chairperson of SDTC. Doesn't say that you were the individual reaching out, although that's the allegation that the Conservatives have made today and irresponsibly many times before that. To your recollection, I think you've said, just so I'm clear, you don't recall reaching out, and the Ethics Commissioner's report says it was your staff that reached out. Are you aware of who reached out?
Yeah, again, as I said, I don't recall such conversations, but it's not uncommon for me or my staff or others to reach out to a number of people to apply for a number of roles. In some instances, I'd like to tell this committee that we would ask multiple people to apply for the same role, because the idea was we wanted more people to apply. This was a new process, and so it was very different than what was done in the past. And the whole objective was to encourage a greater pool of applicants. And in this particular instance, as the PCO officials indicated, over 100 people did apply. And ultimately, that's what we wanted. We wanted more people to apply, not less.
And Mr. Bains, just on that, were you friends with Ms. Verschern beforehand? Did you know her beforehand? I mean, this is a situation where she obviously has a record in the Conservative Party. She's got a record, a public record you've already identified. I don't need to go run through it. As a business leader, as an appointee of the Harper government, were you friends with her beforehand?
No, we weren't friends. She did some work with Minister Parody on the STIC committee. And so when I became a minister, I was introduced to her in that capacity, but I had no such prior relationship with her.
You were introduced to her in the capacity of a Harper government appointee.
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
You were introduced to her in her capacity as a Harper government appointee.
That is correct. As mentioned before, by Stephen Harper, Minister Flaherty, and Minister Parody.
Right, and a conservative donor at that. Okay, so just because this, I think Mr. Cooper said conflict-ridden. He might not know what that means, because when you actually read the Ethics Commissioner's report, they go through a single conflict actually with respect to NR Store. The fact that she's on the board of the Verschuren Center and Mars are not pecuniary conflicts in the same way that we would understand a conflict, but regardless, she seeks formal advice, and she's told, I don't know if you've read the Ethics Commissioner's report, but in the end, she was advised that her conflict with NR Store and other potential conflicts would not prevent her from accepting the appointment as long as she followed the rules set out in the Conflict of Interest Act. So, to your understanding, this is not the first time someone would have had a conflict in being appointed to a board. That's why we have the Conflict of Interest Act to manage. And if this was conflict-ridden, surely, yeah, you wouldn't have appointed her. But NR Store and her role at the Verschuren Center and Mars, I mean, in your view, should this have precluded her from being appointed, given her credibility otherwise, and given the Ethics Commissioner said the conflict could be managed?
Yeah, there's a couple of components to that question, Mr. Chair. One is that this was all public knowledge. Two, as I've indicated, it's not uncommon for individuals to seek the advice and counsel of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And three, as you've indicated, Mr. Chair, through the member, that as she can pursue the opportunity as long as she follows the rules. And I think that's the key takeaway for a committee member today, is that the onus is on the individuals to follow the rules, as the member has indicated.
Let's talk about following the rules in relation to Ms. Verschuren, because she is being cast. This has been cast by Conservatives as criminal conduct, effectively. We refer the matter to the RCMP. And yet, when you read that Ethics Commissioner's report, I don't know if you have, but you should know, Mr. Bains, that the allegations here, the conflicts that the Ethics Commissioner have found, one, Ms. Verschuren followed a practice to abstain from votes instead of recusing herself, but votes that she had no financial interest in, just so we're absolutely clear. No financial interest, but she was abstaining as opposed to recusing, and she should have because of her role at the Verschuren Center and Mars. And the one area where she did have a financial interest, in the words of the Ethics Commissioner, it was an oversight compounded when the board was presented with incorrect legal advice justifying this course of action. And then it goes on, this idea that she attempted to influence the decisions of her colleagues, which I know is another allegation. The Ethics Commissioner, his words, there is no evidence that Ms. Verschuren attempted to influence the decision of her colleagues on SDTC's board. I find that she did not contravene Section 9 of the Act. It is astounding to me that you're now at the committee for a second time, that the allegations are you're somehow tied up with Ms. Verschuren, even though she was a conservative donor and a conservative appointee. It's an arm's-length corporation, and the actual conflicts that we're talking about have nothing to do with you. Do the conflicts have anything to do with you?
Mr. Chair, to answer the member, the answer is no.
Thank you. I'm afraid.
Let's stop wasting our time.
That is the time. Beginning now the third round, we're starting with Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Bains, for reappearing today. We received the disturbing report from the Auditor General last June, where she found that the Trudeau government has turned the once legitimate Sustainable Development Technology Canada into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. The Auditor General made it clear that the blame for this scandal falls...
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
I'm just curious, point of clarification. When a member misstates an official document,
there's no such thing as a point of clarification.
Is that to be corrected at some point?
Mr. Erskine-Smith, I'm here to move the meeting along.
Well, perhaps
there is flourish on both sides, and as I've stated before, a government member will follow Mr. Stewart, and there'll be the right to reply at that point.
So he is allowed to misstate an official document from an official.
Mr. Erskine, this is not a point of order. This is not a point of order. And on the non-same point of order, yes, Mr. Cooper, I will hear from you.
Yeah. Well, put on record the complete picture that Ms. Verschuren said with respect to the minister that he spoke. to me, as did his policy advisor, and Leah Lawrence said she had talked to Mr. Bains 3 times before she agreed.
Thank you,
and she said he did know, but she had a direct conflict.
Your point has been made, which I think is why we're here, why we're doing this study, is that there are many statements out there that contradict one another. Yes, Ms. Khalid, you have the same point of order.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to clarify, because this is actually quite concerning, and more in a broad sense as opposed to the specific topic at hand. Is it okay for members to outright lie or to put misstatements on the record and that cannot be corrected? I mean, like I can come in here in this committee today and say, hey, the sky is red. And would that be something that would not be corrected?
You are certainly entitled to say that, Ms. Khalid.
I'm not sure why we are.
And Ms. Khalid, that's right. And you'll have the floor right after Mr. Stewart to address any concerns you have about things that have been said previously. But to reiterate, it is your right to say the sky is red. Yes. Mr. Is this a point of order?
On the same point of order, for Ms. Khalid to impugn the integrity of members of this committee when simply I am reading verbatim from transcripts of committee testimony.
So,
and she says
Ms. Khalid,
is lies?
I hear you.
Does she live in an alternate universe?
Mr. Cooper, so Ms. Khalid, it is not helpful to accuse
like
colleagues of lying, but I'm going to hear from you.
concerns.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you so very much. We do live in the same universe, and I would appreciate if my colleagues across the way would be more truthful in how they frame an issue.
Thank you.
And actually, excuse me?
Thank
read
you.
the testimony.
Mr. Cooper, you too will have another turn. Ms. Khalid, if you could just conclude it, that's...
You know, Chair, there's no way getting through to them. That's fine.
But again, I appreciate
that's not
words
a point of order.
Like untruthful. That's parliamentary. The other word, I would urge all members to avoid that. Mr. Stewart, back to you for just over 4.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Auditor General made it clear, abundantly clear, that the blame for this scandal falls squarely on you as the former Liberal Industry Minister and the current Industry Minister, who did not sufficiently monitor the contracts being given to Liberal insiders. The Auditor General found that the Liberal-appointed SDTC board gave $330 million of taxpayer money to companies where the board members that voted to give out that money had a conflict of interest. In addition, the Auditor General found the same Liberal-appointed board approved another $59 million in projects that were not eligible for funding because they were outside the SDTC Foundation's mandate. The Auditor General said at least 10 of those projects did not even produce green technology or contribute to emission reductions. None whatsoever. Last week, we had a senior official from the Privy Council office, the Prime Minister's own department, testify as we are trying to seek clarity on Annette Verschieren's appointment as chairperson in 2019. The lack of consistency in witness testimony certainly looks like a cover-up at the highest levels of the current government. Ms. Verschieren has testified that she did not apply for the chairperson role, but had been called 2 or 3 times by you, Mr. Bains, in your former role as Industry Minister, asking her to take the job. Leah Lawrence, President of SDTC, also testified that Minister Bains actually did absolutely call Annette Verschieren twice or multiple times. This was after nearly a year-long selection process had already produced a short list of names for your consideration. But then suddenly Ms. Verschieren's name was suspiciously added, and she was appointed the chairperson on June 19, 2019. We have not been able to find out why the last-minute addition. It certainly was the beginning of the culture of corruption at the Liberals' Green Slush Fund. Ms. Verschieren testified at the Industry Committee on September 16th that she did not apply for the chair position. As I said earlier, she said you approached her 2 or 3 times to take the position of chair of the Liberals' Green Slush Fund.
Yes, Mr.
It's got nothing to do on debate. It's just that you've been pretty hard on us for reading something, and I'm pretty sure, I do respect Mr. Stewart, but I'm pretty sure he's reading as well, so we're just to apply the same rules as you have given us.
What?
To the same.
Sorry, Mr. Durain, that is in terms of when we're debating a motion. And in your time, in your time with a witness, you could read for 5 minutes, and it would not. It's your 5 minutes. So members can read, they can cite evidence. There's no problem with that. It's when we're debating a motion that requires members to be. Okay, thank you. You can back up, Mr. Stewart, and I will give you some little more time just to. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. And I would submit that these are my own questions that were prepared, and because of the chronological order, I'm trying to keep it in line. Back to my questioning, but in your testimony to the Public Accounts Committee on October the 9th, you stated that you can't recall asking her to take the position. I'm referring to Ms. Verschieren. So earlier today, in your testimony, you stated it was not uncommon for you to call people, to ask them to apply. These are your words, Mr. Bains. So Ms. Verschieren remembers you calling her 2 or 3 times, and Leah Lawrence remembers you calling her at least twice. My question to you today, and I can guarantee you that a proper answer is not as I stated earlier, because this isn't my role, this particular file, so I would like a real answer and a new one on why the President and Annette Verschieren remember as many as 5 phone calls between the two of them, and you remember none. Why is that?
Thank you very much for the question. As I said, the answer to your question is very clear. The Privy Council official highlighted on a number of occasions that Ms. Verschieren did apply. So that is public.
Cut you off there, and the reason I'm cutting you off is because I didn't ask you if she applied. I asked you if you phoned her. Everybody remembers you phoning her except for you yourself. So I'm going to ask you again. Isn't it true that you called Ms. Verschieren and asked her to apply for the position? That's a yes or a no, to be very specific.
No, I've answered that question multiple times, and I'm more than glad to answer that question again. It's not uncommon for me to reach out to a number of people. I don't recall the specific conversation, but as I've indicated, we wanted more, not less people to apply, and they had to go through a vetting process, which was conducted by PCO.
Time's up. Scared you. Any more?
You got time for one more question.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Last question, and quite frankly, it's the same question. Former Minister Bains, everyone in Canada knows you called Annette Verschieren. Why can't you simply admit you did that? You admitted you called other people. Is it because you can't take accountability for this massive corruption of failure? Or you won't take accountability? You've clearly called others. You admitted it. Admit that you called her and admit it's a failure. That's my question. Admit it now while you still can.
Mr. Bains, the floor is yours if you'd like to answer.
Okay, so just again, I've answered that question. I'll answer it again, which is all individuals applied for the roles, including Ms. Verschieren.
Thank you very much. We're moving on now to Ms. Khalid. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
All right, mute everybody. Ms. Khalid.
Thank you very much, Chair. And you know what? I'll start by just highlighting when I was first deciding whether to run in politics or not, I had to be asked a whole bunch of times. And in fact, statistics show how many more times women need to be asked in order to fill these leadership positions. And, you know, there is the imposter syndrome that a lot of women deal with, including myself. And so I understand and appreciate why anybody would be calling, would be encouraging women to fill important board positions, to be filling important leadership positions, regardless of in this situation or any others across our country. So I remember when Minister Bains was a minister, he had put forward a really important bill with respect to ensuring that there was equity within corporate boards, and that was one of my favorite pieces of legislation that minister put forward. So thank you for that, Minister Bains. To my question. Can you walk us through specifically what is the process? What does the process look like when somebody is going to become a part of a board? How does that process work? And then at what point does ministerial intervention or participation, when does that happen as well?
Thank you very much for the question, Chair. To the member, the process is very open, and it was established in 2016. All appointments were public, and individuals actually had to apply. And in many instances, if individuals, after they applied, met the criteria, would most likely be called for, according to what the PCO official said, for an interview. Those interviews were conducted, and based on that, recommendations then are made through an advice letter by PCO to the respective ministers and their departments on those positions that the people are applying for. Then the minister determines and makes a recommendation, which is called a governor in council recommendation. So that's essentially the process. It does engage the PCO, and it is open. It does encourage more people, not less, to apply. And there is a rigorous vetting process that my understanding that the PCO official took the committee through, which indicates that it does look at individuals meeting a criteria for the different jobs and positions that are publicly made available. But again, all these positions are public, and my understanding is that every single person has to apply.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Mr. Bains, do you have any regrets, given that you've come to this committee twice now to talk about the exact same issue? Do you have any regrets of the situation at SDTC? And do you have regrets knowing that this whole affair has had severe consequences on an industry that relies on public funding to de-risk investments in that sector?
I think the policy objectives are very clear, and you're right in that the clean tech sector is so important to Canada. The jobs that it creates, the innovation that it spurs, the entrepreneurs that it supports, those are the policy objectives. And you want to make sure that those policy objectives are advanced to deal with issues around productivity, around growth. And as you've indicated, it is deeply, deeply disappointing to see that a number of companies may not receive the funds at the appropriate time to scale and grow due to a number of issues that have been risen here. So I think as someone who believes in Canada, who believes in Canadian companies, who believes in our ability to succeed, it's important that we have a vibrant and a well-funded clean tech sector. And my understanding is, and I believe other witnesses have spoken to this, that Sustainable Development Technology Canada played an important role in providing that funding for these companies, in supporting Canadian entrepreneurs. And I think that good work should not be underestimated because we're in a global race for these jobs, for these technologies and scaling these technologies. And I think it's important now more than ever when we deal with issues around productivity that we find ways to support our Canadian entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
The floor is yours, Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Bains, Mr. Noseworthy was not only in attendance at those board meetings, and his name is on all the minutes. Moreover, he was highly involved in the appointment of Ms. Verschuren. Now, as Ms. Lawrence just explained, Mr. Noseworthy communicated directly with Ms. Lawrence, who was the CEO of STDTC, to tell her that Ms. Verschuren was going to become the new president. Were you aware of this conversation?
Thank you very much for the question, Chair. This is the first time I've heard of such a process taking place.
Est-ce que ça vous semble?
Does it strike you normal that the ADM would communicate with the CEO of SDTC as to who the new chair of the board would be?
Est-ce un processus que vous avez...
Is that a process that you've seen occur during your 5-year tenure as minister previously?
So just to clarify, are you saying that the assistant deputy minister reached out to the current chair to say who the new chair was? I just wanted to clarify. My apologies.
Non, avec la PDG.
No, with the CEO, Ms. Lawrence, the CEO back in the day. They informed the CEO of the day who the new chair would be, and a couple of days later, Ms. Vishuram was already then on the board. That's what Ms. Lawrence said.
So there probably is a process where a governor and council appointment recommendation once passed through cabinet of informing key stakeholders. So I assume letting the CEO would be part of the process. I just don't know the sequence or timing that you're referring to.
C'était des appels dans lesquels Madame...
I'm referring to telephone calls in which Ms. Lawrence indicated that there was a conflict of interest issue. She knew Ms. Vishuram and the potential conflicts of interest that were, in fact, more than just apparent. And she mentioned those to Mr. Noseworthy. And I imagine Mr. Noseworthy never flagged those potential issues with you or with your deputy minister?
As I indicated, when it came to Ms. Vishuram or any of the other candidates that were presented to me, they had to go through a vetting process. So I had enormous confidence in that process in determining who the names would be, and that's how I approached my position on making the GIC recommendation.
Parce que de sérieuses réserves ont...
Well, serious misgivings were raised by the CEO of SDTC, and you hadn't gotten wind or you had no knowledge of those serious reservations that the CEO had raised it with the ADM. He kept it for himself, apparently, according to you. Have I understood the situation correctly?
What I can say, and that it's on the public record as well, just to make sure we're on the same page, is that when Ms. Vishuram did want to apply, or after she applied, did engage with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to get guidance on can she proceed. So to your point, if such issues were raised, my understanding is that those issues were addressed in her approach with the commissioner to get clarification on can she pursue this position. And my understanding, based on the testimony that's been presented, that she did get clearance.
Voilà, merci beaucoup. Up next, Mr. Cannings, you have the floor for about 2.5 minutes.
Santa Claus?
Well, thank you. And I just want to clarify in my head the whole what we're hearing here today. It seems, Mr. Bains, that what you're saying is that there was no role for you to play in even knowing about a conflict of interest, let alone considering it, which strikes me as odd, but that all those discussions would have taken place from the deputy minister on down in your department and within the board themselves. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Chair. To the member, in my opening statement, I mentioned there was over 100 governor and council appointments, and those appointments were made through the recommendations that were given by PCO. And so my understanding is that all such issues were looked at through the vetting process, and that ultimately any individual that did go through that process had an obligation to follow the Conflict of Interest Act. So I believe, when you're dealing with such a number of appointments over a period of time, the process needs to be clear in terms of vetting the individuals, and then rules are also clear on how the individual should conduct themselves. And I firmly believe the onus is on the individuals to make sure that they comply with the Act.
Okay, and just getting back to what you might hear as a minister, I can understand that your ministry was one of the more large and perhaps a little complex, but you had a deputy minister who was hearing from people like Mr. Noseworthy about things. SDTC was, I would suggest, a very large and important project under your ministry. It wasn't, some minor thing way down low. This is something that dealt with a lot of money, a lot of important projects that were, it was one of the flagship projects of your government in terms of trying to deal with climate challenges that you would be, I would hope, very proud of, that you would hear from your deputy minister on a regular basis as to how all that was going. And here we have an assistant deputy minister sitting in on the board meetings, hearing things that the Auditor General found concerning, and yet your deputy minister never reported to you. I don't know how often you spoke to your deputy minister. I would hope on a daily basis, but you never heard anything regarding these issues from the deputy minister.
So to answer the two questions I believe that you have posed, one is the clean tech sector and Sustainable Development Technology Canada and the role that it played in providing capital was important. And again, for the reason I stated before, with another member that asked me about the clean tech sector. And secondly, I did speak with my deputy minister on a regular basis. The issues that you are highlighting were never brought to my attention.
Thank you. That is your time. I gave you a little bit more to make up for your opening. You were short there. And you will have one other opportunity, Mr. Cannings, as well. There'll be one more round after this. Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you, Mr. Bains, for joining us here this afternoon. I want to pick up again on the appointment of Ms. Verschaeren as chair of SDTC. Where I'm struggling is that on the one hand, you're saying that this was a new appointments process that the government had put in place. But where I struggle is that the PCO informed this committee that the application for this position for chair was open from September 21st, 2018 until October 12th, 2018, and that 54 people applied, and Annette Verschaeren was not one of those people. But then we find out from testimony from Ms. Verschaeren that, and I'm going to quote her testimony, I was requested to consider being an applicant. So then the application period reopened, and Ms. Verschaeren applied after being requested to apply on April 30th, 2019, 6 months after the original application period had been open. Did you request that that application period be extended?
Chair, thank you for that question. Pertaining to the number of PCO advice letters that I received, I believe it wasn't uncommon to get multiple letters and multiple recommendations for positions that were people applied to. And in this particular instance, that was the case.
So you're telling me that those 54 applicants, not one of them had a clean record with no conflicts of interest that could have been appointed and avoided all this mess had you accepted one of those 54 appointments? None of those 54 were qualified?
No, what I'm saying is that sometimes you receive multiple letters and you take a look at it holistically. My understanding, according to the PCO official, was that 54 people applied, and I believe 47 applied after that. So it's great to see more, not less people apply. That means there's more names in the system, and I believe there was, according to the PCO official, 3 candidates that were also interviewed. And so the point I'm making is that it's not uncommon to have multiple rounds, multiple vettings, and multiple names.
Well, I'm just going to stop you there. But all else being equal, would you at least agree that it would have been preferable to have named someone who didn't have conflict of interest? Would it not have been preferable to accept one of those other nearly 100 applicants had they not had a conflict of interest? Would you at least agree with that?
So 2 points, Chair, to the member. One is that positions are open until it's filled, and so names keep on coming through the system until an announcement's made. Secondly, when the announcement from Ms. Verschaeren was made, it was well received. It was something that I know that was public. People understood the work that Ms. Verschuren had done for the previous Conservative government, her reputation as a business leader. And
Okay,
so what I'm getting at is that it was all public.
Okay, again, I want to go back to the point, though. With the benefit of hindsight, at least, would you agree that it would have been preferable not to have nominated Ms. Verschuren, but have instead nominated someone who didn't have conflict of interest? At least with the benefit of hindsight, would you at least agree with that point?
Respectfully, if I may, Mr. Chair, I think the core issue here is people following the Conflict of Interest Act.
That's not what he asked.
And holding themselves to the obligations under that act.
He even gave you the benefit of hindsight.
Ms. Verschuren's credentials, they were impeccable. She was highly regarded both in the public and private sector.
Okay, you mentioned in response that's a similar question, or similar point in a previous response. You said the onus is on the individual to follow the rules. But is there not a similar onus on you as the minister responsible under the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act? Is there not an onus on you as well to ensure that people are put into those positions who don't have conflicts of interest? Is there not also an onus on you to make sure that you're not putting people in who have clear conflict of interest and are aware of those conflicts of interest when you are making the appointments?
So there's a few components to that. One is the responsibility of the ministers to appoint 7 of the 15 people through the new appointments process, which vets these individuals. That was done. Secondly, it's important to note that the individuals have the credentials that meet the requirements. And in this particular case, Ms. Verschuren had the qualifications, and more importantly, her reputation as a businesswoman, as a business leader, was well known.
Very short, Mr. Nader.
So I just want to see, could you at least agree that appointing someone without conflict of interest who would not be in a position to fund their own businesses, would you at least admit, with the benefit of hindsight, that that would have been preferable?
The preference is for people to respect and follow the Conflict of Interest Act. I think that's the takeaway.
Thank you very much. Up next, Ms. Yip for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Basili, the
not
chair
yippee.
of SDTC, has stated publicly that government was looking to replace him and find a replacement quickly, that his views were contrary to the government's in certain regards. This was in the spring of 2019, and PCO has sent us a document which includes the initial job posting for the chairperson position that was posted in March of 2018, a year before the final appointment. That appointment took a long time to fill. When was Mr. Basili's term coming to an end?
I don't recall a specific timeline of when the appointment was coming to an end. I think it's important to note that if you are a current chair or you had a current role or position, you had to apply. You had to apply to the position. And, I had a very good working relationship with Mr. Basili and held him, and so did my team in high regard.
So why was the government of the view that a new chairperson was needed? Why wasn't he kept on for another mandate?
Again, these positions come up, and so you have to apply for it. I think the key takeaway there is that under the new appointments process, even if you two are to renew someone, they have to apply. And so regardless of if the person is well respected or not, they must apply for the position.
Can you speak to the difficulty of finding a new chairperson?
Look, it's important skill set to have someone who understands government, who understands the business sector, have that public-private background. But I think, Canada's full of talented people. And I think the big takeaway in our institutions, in our system, is how do we really open it up to Canadians? How do we make sure that Canadians are aware of the opportunities? How do we make sure that Canadians understand that they can serve, that they can have impact? And so I think the takeaway here was to get the message out there. And as I stated on a number of occasions on answers that I've given to this committee, is that it's not uncommon for me or my staff or for others to go out there and say, look, apply. These are important roles. We want the best and brightest. And then I have complete confidence in the new appointment process that would vet these individuals. So when names were given to me, two things were apparent. One is that we really opened it up. It was open, it was transparent. And B, it's merit-based, that people that are the most qualified and best positioned would have these opportunities. And I think that's the key takeaway. And that's what the new appointment process tried to accomplish. And in this particular instance, as being stated by the PCO official, a lot of names were, a lot of people, applied. And it was great to see that. And ultimately, a number of recommendations were made to me.
Yeah, 100 people, I believe that's a lot.
I believe so, over 100. That is correct, Mr. Chair.
So you said it's not uncommon to speak to prospective applicants to encourage them. And how did you encourage them?
Mr. Chair, that's a great question. So if I'm at events, if I meet people, we're public officials, so we're constantly out there speaking to a lot of people in different capacities. And I would say, look, as part of the new government, it's important that we attract the best and brightest from across the country. There's a number of opportunities. Go to the website, look at the opportunities. And so these were just casual conversations you'd have with people when you would meet them or talk to them. That's why I don't recall every specific conversation. Like I said, this is an appointment that took place over 5 years ago. There's over 100 appointments that I made that were governor and council. I'd received probably hundreds of recommendations. If you take on average 4 per appointment, that's over 400 names. So I don't recall all the names. I don't recall all the conversations. But I think people can have confidence that these individuals had to apply, that they had to put their name forward, that there was a process to vet them, that this process did engage our public sector, that these individuals had to meet a certain criteria. And so I think that's the important takeaway as well, if I may say so, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Just to be clear, was there any indication through the appointments process that the process that you've seen time and time again was not followed?
No, my understanding is with this or other appointments, the whole objective was for the new appointments process to have individuals apply, and in some instances, if they moved ahead in the application process, to be interviewed. And so I think it was a rigorous process, transparent and open, but it was one open to all Canadians. And I think on balance, at times it might take a little bit of additional due diligence and time, but I had confidence that the new process, that the vetting was done in a professional way.
Thank you very much. That is time.
Thank you.
Beginning our our fourth and final round, again, will be of 6 minutes. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5.
All right, Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Former Liberal Minister Bains, your department had contribution agreements with SDTC. It was funding SDTC, correct?
My understanding is that we allocated funds to Sustainable Development Technology Canada.
Yes, through contribution agreements. So why did your department, under your watch, fail to conduct even a single audit to determine SDTC's compliance with the contribution agreements with your department? Why did that not happen?
The monies were allocated to this arm's length organization that made the determinations, and there are regular routine checks and balances that exist in the system, and my understanding is that those processes were followed.
Balances didn't work because 59 million taxpayer dollars went out the door in contravention of the contribution agreements with your department. Were you unaware that monies upon millions of dollars of tax dollars were going out the door improperly? Is that what you're saying? You were oblivious to that fact as minister?
To answer that question, Mr. Chair, I've been very clear that the members on the board are independent. They make these decisions independently.
Former Liberal Minister Bains, do you accept that your department had a responsibility to see that the fund used public funds appropriately.
Mr. Chair, as I was saying before I was interrupted, that this is an independent board that makes independent
I would
decisions
invite you to
on
read paragraph 6.68 of the Auditor General's report that says precisely that. We're talking about $1 billion tax dollars here that your department sent to SDTC. Your department had a duty to see that those funds were being used appropriately. Did you ask any questions to anyone about what was going on with $1 billion taxpayer dollars that your department was responsible for overseeing?
Mr. Chair, as I stated before, this independent board had clear rules on how to make decisions, on how to allocate funds, on how to engage management, and how to oversee the day-to-day operations. That is why it's an arm's length
How often did
organization.
you make inquiries about what was going on at SDTC? How often did you speak to your deputy minister? How often did you speak to ADM Noseworthy, who was sitting in on every one of these board meetings in which there were conflicts, in which tens of millions of dollars improperly went out the door?
Mr. Chair, again, the issues with respects to the conduct of the board members was not brought to my attention.
Well, before
That
you
didn't
went
answer
to
the question.
Cabinet and requested $750 million be sent over to SDTC, did you ask for any kind of report, any sort of overview of what was going on at SDTC? An audit? Anything?
As the member knows, when monies are allocated, they're part of the budget that is debated in the House of Commons. That was all done in a very open, transparent way of where the funds would go.
Former Liberal
what they would be
Minister Bains, do you
allocated for.
accept the principle of ministerial responsibility?
I think it's important to advance the interests of Canadians to make sure that we continue to support, in this particular instance, the clean tech sector.
Former Liberal Minister Bains, it's clear that you were AWOL as minister. You didn't care, and as a result, $400 million taxpayer dollars improperly went out the door at SDTC. So will you at least accept responsibility that you didn't do proper due diligence, you didn't ask the right questions, or is it that you just didn't care and turned a blind eye?
Mr. Chair, respectfully to the member, I care very much about the clean tech sector. I've stated why it's important and why we had sustainable.
Mr. Bains, you don't.
Point of order,
you know
Chair?
who you don't care about
Point of
is
order,
the
Chair?
taxpayer.
Just 1 second. I'll come back to Mr. Cooper. Yes.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to flag the bells are ringing. What's going on? Quorum call? Okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
You have the time for this last question, Mr. Cooper, and not a long wind-up. So you have time for a succinct question, please.
Former Liberal Minister Bains, it's clear you don't care about conflicts of interest and you don't care about the stewardship of taxpayer dollars. And as a result, $400 million improperly went out the door under your watch as minister. And when I asked you whether you take responsibility, you couldn't even answer that. You have no shame.
Get roasted.
Thank you very much. We'll move on now to Mr. Drouin. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For 5 minutes, yeah, I've heard a lot of sanctimonious accusations towards you, and I'm not going to repeat the line, but you are a private individual, and I do respect that, and I hope that when former ministers come to this committee, we do have a respect to treat them as private citizens. But the official opposition is making a lot of accusations as wasting taxpayer dollars or being accountable, and I have yet to hear any official member of the opposition on their conduct of spending private taxpayer dollars on party conventions. And I'm just waiting if Mr. Perkins or Mr. Brock or Mr. Inier paid back the dollars. They want to come into power, and yet they're lecturing they're lecturing us on the importance of spending taxpayer dollars. And we stopped this practice in 2014, but the Conservatives haven't stopped that. And, Nanaimo was not a party convention, Mr. Brock, and you should know that. There's a difference. That's why we stopped this practice in 2014. En français, on dit c'est pas parce que c'est légal que...
In French, we say it's not because it's legal that it's morally acceptable.
Mr. Bains, obviously, you've come here for the third time again, and the opposition is trying to, the official opposition is trying to say that you should be the judge of conflict of interest. My question to you is, why do we have an ethics commissioner? And when you were minister, appointed minister, obviously you have to go through, just like all members of parliament, but there is scrutiny on, a harder scrutiny on particular ministers. So you have to report everything to the ethics commissioner, but the onus is on you, correct?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the member for the questions. First of all, I just want to start off by saying I very much respect the work that committee members are doing, the parliamentarians do. And as I said, I'm here to answer the questions, and I've been answering all the questions that have been posed to me.
No, you haven't.
With regards to the last question that was asked in terms of the responsibilities of public office holders, you're absolutely correct. The onus is on the individuals. If you are a public office holder, in many instances, I know of a number of people that have reached out to the independent ethics and conflict of interest commissioner to get advice, to get that impartial feedback so that they can conduct themselves in a manner that allows them to fulfill their duties. And so that is why I think the key takeaway for members in this committee, if I may say so, is that the crux of the matter, the core matter here is how individuals conduct themselves. And that they must uphold themselves to this high standard, and that's really the issue here. I think individuals were very clearly vetted and qualified. Individuals had the ability to serve, but the issue with regards to their conduct and how they need to engage is done in a manner that needs to be consistent with the Conflict of Interest Act. And as the members rightfully pointed out, the onus is on all public office holders.
Right, and we do have an ethics commissioner who's produced a report on Ms. Verschuren, and I think my colleague, Mr. Erskine Smith, has properly quoted the issues of Ms. Verschuren. But I do want to confirm, because I get the sense that we're trying to tie the decision-making directly to you or the minister's office, but you or your staff were never involved in the day-to-day operations of SDTC, correct?
Mr. Chair, the question asked by the member is correct, whereby SDTC is an arm's length organization. The management sees the day-to-day operations, and there was no such involvement from the department on the day-to-day decisions made by Sustainable Development Technology Canada.
So what we're left here is a few individuals who did not follow the Act, were properly appointed and followed the due process, but and I think the ethics commissioner, we already know this because this is all public information. The ethics commissioner has already ruled on Ms. Verschuren and her conduct and the act that she contravened, the sections of the act that she contravened, and the sections of the act that she did not contravene. So I think Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Bains has made an appearance, and I do want to thank you for coming back here. But I will conclude my questioning because I think I've heard everything we need to hear on the particular matters of Mr. Bains and SDTC.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to answer these questions in great detail. As I say, the work that the committee does is very important.
Thank you very much. We just have a few more members remaining. Thank you, Mr. Durain. Madame Secrétaire Durain, vous pouvez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, en poursuivant ma ligne...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Along the same lines as my previous questioning, Mr. Bains, when Ms. Lawrence testified, she was unequivocal on the fact that she warned Mr. Noseworthy, i.e. the ADM, of her concerns regarding Ms. Verschuren's conflicts of interest, not just once, but on 2 occasions. Does that surprise you?
Again, thank you for the question. This was new information that was something that I heard about later on, but not during my tenure as my time at ISED.
Très bien. Est-ce que vous pensez...
I see. Do you think that that kind of information, which is quite important, the CEO of an organisation who's saying, I think that it's dangerous to appoint Ms. Verschuren as chairperson of the board, is that's information that Mr. Noseworthy had knowledge of? Shouldn't that have at least been escalated to the Deputy Minister?
There's potential routes of how that could be addressed. One such a route is that the individual, in this particular case, Ms. Verschuren, for example, who we're talking about, did seek the advice and counsel of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner.
Merci, Monsieur Bains. Mon temps est limité. Vous avez déjà répondu ça.
Sorry to cut you off, but as far as the process is concerned, this is highly relevant information. Ms. Verschuren had a clear conflict of interest, and the CEO of SDTC mentioned that on several occasions. Don't you think? I'll repeat, you were the minister for over 5 years. As far as the process is concerned, isn't it the role of the ADM to inform the Deputy Minister and also in this case the Minister's staff and by extension the Minister? There's a substantive conflict of interest given that the buck stops with the Minister to appoint individuals. Did you simply blindly trust the department?
No, I would respectfully say to the member, it was the vetting process that I respected a great deal. That was led by PCO. That would make recommendations that gave me confidence that the individuals met the criteria.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ce sera tout pour moi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all.
Mr. Canings, you have the floor, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Okay, well, thanks. I will just continue on. I'm just trying to stick with things that are clearly your responsibility or were your responsibility, Mr. Bains. And one of those, as I mentioned before, under the Act, the Minister is responsible to ensure that board members are appointed, or at least 7 of them out of the 15, I think. And yet we had times, as I mentioned, where those numbers declined drastically, and the board, I don't know, can't imagine how the board would properly function with only 3 of those members. Just wondering what the process of appointing the board members that you were responsible for, was that something that the searches, the openings were initiated by PCO, or who put that out, or was it through your staff and then to PCO and then back to you? What was the process and why did it fail?
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, to the member for that question. All these appointments were made public through an appointments website that's available to everyone. There could be potential gaps for a whole host of reasons in terms of delays or when an appointment is made, depending on the vetting process and the number of appointments, etc. But as I said, and as the members indicated, the responsibility of the Minister of ISED was to appoint the 7 of the 15 members, and that's what I did during my tenure, was appoint individuals. And
Liberal insiders,
again, these individuals have to go through that vetting process. And in some instances, that could take a bit longer than anticipated because there's so many people applying. And I think when you start a new appointments process as well, you want to make sure it's properly resourced. And so there could be some growing pains there associated with that timeline.
That's all I have.
Okay, all right, very good then. Thank you. Turning now to Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, and then we'll hear from Mr. Ertzen-Smith. Mr. Perkins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bains. You know who Leah Lawrence is?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Yes, she is the former CEO of Sustainable Development Technology Canada.
In the appointment process of Ms. Verschuren, you can't recall talking to Ms. Verschuren, although she testified before committee that you did. Do you recall talking to Ms. Leah Lawrence about it and asking her to vet the 2 names?
no, I do not recall having such conversations.
Do you recall any conversations with ADM Noseworthy, who sat in every board meeting, telling you and your office that the board chair, proposed board chair, Mr. Sharon, had a conflict of interest? Is the first in the history, contrary to MP Erskine-Smith, the first in the history of SDTC to be appointed as chair of the board with a conflict of interest?
Again, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, individuals should follow the Conflict of Interest Act. That's point one. Point two is, again, no issues were raised to my attention in terms of the conduct of the board on the day-to-day basis, because this is an arm's length organization.
Do you recall the former head of corporate affairs for SDTC, who prior to that worked in the current Prime Minister's office? Do you recall her talking to you and your office about the conflict of interest?
Again, I don't know who you're referring to. Respectfully, as I said, these appointments were made over 5 years ago. And so specific conversations or names on lists, I don't have specific recollections.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move a motion, because it appears that the amnesia of the witness, and I would have thought he would have prepared better for committee now that he's had a couple of shots at it over the last couple of months, that there are some other folks we need to hear from in this committee about this appointments process to actually fill in the gaps of the things that former Liberal Minister Bains can't remember conveniently. Sir. So I would move that the committee invite the former president of SDTC, Leah Lawrence, to appear in relation to the ongoing study of the Auditor General's report of Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and that we also invite former ADM Noseworthy.
Yes. Agreed.
Just one second. Okay, hold on. I see Madame Secretary. Yes, Mr. Perkins, have you submitted the motion to the clerk as read out?
Yes, I believe we have, but
all right. I'm going to just suspend for, and I see Ms. Khalid as well. I'm going to suspend here. We're going to get the motion to you all. We'll come back in about 2 or 3 minutes. Mr. Bains, in the meantime, if you want to get up and stretch your legs for a few minutes, you're certainly welcome to do that, please. If you could just hold on. You know how these things go sometimes. They can be short or long. And I like to test the temperature of the room before making a decision. So if you do want to step out for just 3 to 5 minutes, that's no problem. Okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And this meeting is suspended for 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay. While they're suspended, let's go ahead and check to see what's on at the House. We'll make sure we get back to this right away. I suspect they're talking about SDTC.
Which I mentioned earlier. And I should just point out that, as Conservatives, we believe that the digital data privacy is a fundamental right of all Canadians.
Oh, they're talking about the new motion.
Urgently requires us to have the legislation, protections, and enforcement to guarantee the privacy of all Canadians. We also believe that Canada's digital policy framework is in dire need of modernization. It is outdated, it's stale, and the technology is moving much too fast. And we're lagging behind our international counterparts. And when we were on the committee, we heard about best practices, particularly from the European Union, and how we need to institute some of their ideas and their policies so that we can have the flexibility to adjust with data as it's being modernized and the technology is advancing, but also to ensure that Canada's privacy protections are in place. Now, as I mentioned, we have serious concerns about Bill C-27, and so we're going to be looking at ways that we actually redraft that bill, making sure that we bring forward the proper legislation, but not having that burdensome red tape on small businesses and Canadians and sole proprietors. And we're going to put forward a lot of common sense amendments as Bill C-27 is currently sitting in committee being studied. So we know that...
Oh, this is on facial recognition.
That there needs to be lots of consultation, as we had, and ultimately come down to the fact that we have the stakeholders' input, Canadians' input. We hear from security agencies as well as the government on what's needed and what plans there are. Some of the key problems we've got Bill C-27. So first is the Part 1, which is the Consumer Privacy Protection Act. So this Bill C-27 is an omnibus bill. It has 3 chunks of legislation in it. And we believe that it is the right of business to collect and use some personal information, but we also want to bring home greater privacy protections for individuals and charities and bring clarity for organizations, which was right now missing in that part of the bill. Then the government also set up, as part 2, the Personal Information and Data Protection Tribunal Act. Now, putting in place a privacy tribunal appointed by the government to put Liberals in places to oversee the privacy protection of Canadians, we already know from all, as we've been debating here, like the Liberals that were appointed to the Green Slush Fund, this SDTC, ultimately ended in corruption. So we want to make sure that we don't have another layer of bureaucracy. We don't need to overburden this and slowing down the prosecutions for those that actually misuse and violate the privacy laws of Canada. We need to work more closely with the Privacy Commissioner and advocate for the removal of this tribunal. As the Privacy Commissioner has also said, it's completely unnecessary. So we believe that we want to have quicker prosecutions, quicker turnarounds, and remove the gatekeepers that the government is instead proposing. And then the final part of this bill is part 3, Madam Speaker, and it is the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, which I can tell you right now is outdated and broken, even though it's not even legislation yet. It was introduced in June 2022, and things have moved so quickly with things like GPT, new generative AI systems, new facial recognition systems, that the act that's prescribed in there does not work, Madam Speaker. So we are concerned about giving too much regulatory power to the government on a system that's or a legislative and policy framework that's already outdated when Canadians need protection today on the technology of tomorrow.
Questions and comments. Questions and commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, let me just check committee. Committee's still...
Actually been moving.
Does this guy ever leave Parliament?
Does
he sleep here?
Of the internet, including how AI has really exploded in a number over the last number of years, and having regulations in place and having legislation in place is in fact important. In fact, the first time I witnessed the Conservatives actually using AI was when they wanted to amend a piece of legislation, and I think that using AI they came up with 20,000 amendments in committee, Madam Speaker, which was a record in itself. So we do know that the Research Bureau of the Conservative Party does use AI. The question I have for the member, using AI, there is a lot of benefit to it, but there's also drawbacks. Does he have any specific concerns in regards to drawbacks?
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Yeah, I can give you a
just
list.
say this, that with all the censorship that's been coming over from the government and all their various forms of legislation, and then looking at how they have failed to regulate and protect Canadians' privacy, like using AI and to generate intimate images and properly prosecuting them. Instead of protecting our youth, they want to make everybody a criminal, or they want to censor the entire internet. And that's why Canadians do not trust these Liberals. And so, Madam Speaker, I will continue to advocate that for stronger legislation and policy that actually protects Canadians' privacy. I know as Conservatives we'll bring forward the legislation that will protect our youth, but allow the freedom of people to move without being tracked, that they can be anonymous on the internet when they want to be, rather than having the overarching red tape and censorship and unnecessary tracking, as we've witnessed with COVID under the Arrive Scam app, or as what we saw with Public Health Agency Canada, and all that continues to undermine any Canadian's confidence in this Liberal government.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. Now, there were 19 recommendations that were presented to the government regarding its inaction. According to my honourable colleague, should the government use these recommendations to create a bill that better protects Canadians?
Eastman?
And I agree with my honourable colleague that there is a lot of great recommendations in this report that the government should be using as the guide rails on developing any legislation. Recommendation number 2, that we have to ensure that airports and industry publicly disclose the use of facial recognition technology, including but not limited to signage, prominently displayed.
Okay. Committee's back on.
After Mr. Perkins, Ms. Khalid, and then Mr. Erskine Smith. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's kind of evident. I sort of did it in the questioning, but I believe that these two witnesses, which are key in discovering this reporting relationship of the 82% of conflicts when Mr. Noseworthy was in every board meeting, responsible directly to reporting, and that the minister, former minister, is claiming that he was unaware of anything that was going on, which surprises me, since why else would there be an ADM there? Secondly, that the former CEO, I think, can shed some light onto this appointment process, since she was involved in the communications as the leader of the organization on the discussions between the minister's office, the ADM, on the appointment of and the choice process of this particular chair, Ms. Visharian. And I know that the Ethics Commissioner's report says 2, but when the Ethics Commissioner was questioned in this committee, the Ethics Commissioner office admitted it was actually 24 conflicts that were rolled up under 2 categories for those who haven't taken the time to read his testimony. So I think it's important in terms of trying to get to the bottom of this that we have these 2 witnesses before the committee, which we haven't had.
I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Suivant, c'est Madame Secrétaire, please. S'il vous plaît.
Well, I'm in favour of Mr. Perkins' motion. I think that we can get more answers from the horse's mouth, i.e. the people indicated in the motion. I would, however, like to amend the motion to add the following 2 names that I think that will be highly relevant to our study. Ms. I'll give you the names now. Ms. I just don't want to mix up the family names. Hold on a sec, just a tick. So here we go. Ms. Zoe Colbrook, VP, SDTC, who at the time when the Auditor General in fact did her study, well, she was still VP at the time, Mr. Doug McDonkey as well, who was Deputy Minister, who can perhaps give us more answers, because what we're hearing currently as far as testimony is concerned leaves us with more questions than actual answers. So I hope that this new testimony will help us make headway in our study.
Madame, veux-tu parler encore à votre...
Were you still speaking to your amendment or to the motion, or are you finished?
I agree. Get as many people in here as possible.
Très bien. C'était Doug.
Normalement, c'est parti déjà.
Peux-tu l'envoyer à 2 minutes?
Can you send it through? 30 seconds, 10 seconds, countdown. Great. I'm very demanding with my employees.
We will be shortly on an amendment to the motion to add 2 additional names. Those names are being sent to the clerk momentarily, at which point we will send them out. For the sake of debate, if it's all right with Ms. Khalid and Mr. Erskine Smith, I'll just put you to the top of the list to speak to the amendment. Mr. Bains, I'm going to come back to you in a second. I'm going to just take the temperature from a government member, and this is going to be a lengthy process. I will look for agreement to excuse me, but let me just first check with the government members, because I one time acted a bit too hastily and was politely reprimanded, for politely scolded, reprimanded, talked to. I'm just going to check with the clerk here, so just give me a few seconds, everyone.
Yeah, I think he can go. I don't think we have any more rounds of questioning anyway. There's no more rounds.
I'm just waiting for those names. I'll come right back to you as soon as the clerk has them and they're sent out, and then I'll go to Ms. Khalid.
Also, you guys, appreciate everybody being in the chat and watching. I did mention this earlier during question period, but I won't be live streaming tomorrow or Friday. I appreciate everybody to, just take a day off for Halloween, and if you've got anything to do with grandkids or kids or whatever, go ahead and do that. If you do want to watch Parliament tomorrow, you know how to watch it on Parlview. But I won't be live streaming tomorrow at all. Haven't taken a day off during the week in months, and I feel like it's not going to be very busy anyway in Parliament. So, hopefully I don't miss anything. Let's go ahead and check to see if Trudeau's going to be there. Let's see if he releases itinerary for tomorrow. No, he hasn't released his itinerary for tomorrow yet. And I don't have it muted. They have it muted. It's just, I think they're still trying to decide if they can get UC to have the witness dismissed. Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Suzanne.
So everyone, just your attention, please. And Ms. Khalid, if I can just begin to get your attention, because you're up next. The amendment to the motion has been sent out to you all. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor. Then Mr. Erskine-Smith, and after that, Mr. Brock. Ms. Khalid, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And while I appreciate all of our members... Sorry? Oh, well, I appreciate all of our members' concerns on this issue, and I really do respect the way that this issue has been raised, although I think it could have been done with a little bit more class. But ultimately, I'm not sure what the objective is here. The majority of the witnesses that are presented in the amendment and the main motion as well, I'll speak to all of them all at once, Chair, just with respect to efficiency. They've appeared at previous committees before, and I'm happy to highlight which committees they've attended and when on this exact same issue. So we have... Leah Lawrence has appeared twice on SDTC, on the Ethics Committee on November 8th, 2023, and Industry Committee, January 31st, 2024. Andrew Noseworthy has appeared twice already as well, on Industry Committee on December 11, 2023, and on June 5, 2024. And then ADM Douglas McConaughey has appeared on SDTC at Ethics Committee on November 8th, 2023. So I'm not sure if members opposite are feeling that the witnesses are not giving them the answers that they're wanting. I'm not sure if there's any misconception as to what has happened. I think this has been a very, very well documented affair thus far with respect to what has happened and what are the next steps. I'm really not sure, and I'm hoping that members opposite can perhaps clarify this for me as to what the next steps are going to be. At this point in time, we can keep calling witnesses back time and time and time again, and then ask them the same questions again and again and again. But ultimately, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? And if we as a committee can get to that understanding, perhaps we can outline a plan ourselves based on consensus as to where we want to go and how we're going to get there.
Because right now it just looks like we're trying to, grasp at straws at this point.
You banned
and
straws.
I don't think that is the best way that our committee should spend its time. So where I respect members and their interest in exploring this issue, I would encourage members to also note what is the end game, and perhaps work backwards from that end game to where we are now. Because I don't think that that's what's happening. I think just calling in people again and again and again from one committee to another, it's just not helping them achieve what they want to achieve here. And if they're trying to catch gotcha moments or whatever it is that their objectives are, which are very unclear to me, I don't think this is the way to do it. So, Chair, I park my comments there, but I hope that members understand and can outline why, how, and what are the objectives. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask members, is there agreement to excuse the witness? And I'm seeing thumbs up from Mr. Erskine-Smith, who is next. So, Mr. Bains, if you're still with us, I do want to thank you for your testimony today, and I appreciate your offer that should we have additional questions, you'll answer them in writing, and if that happens, the clerk will follow up with you. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Erskine-Smith. You have the floor debating the amendment to the motion, please.
Thanks very much. Two points that I want to make. I'm not entirely new to the committee, and Mr. Cannings, it's good to be on committee with you. But I actually am not familiar with the previous testimony of Ms. Lawrence or
Bring Your Kid to Work Day?
Mr. Noseworthy. I understand they didn't attend this committee. I understand they attended twice at Indu and Effie. And so the first point I just want to make is I'm not instinctively opposed to the idea. I haven't been able to ask them questions, but I would prefer to read their testimony first to determine whether it makes sense to invite them, and maybe my questions that I would ask have been answered. I genuinely don't know until I review the testimony, so some time, even over the weekend, would be appreciated. Which brings me to my second point, which is tomorrow's Halloween. Keeping promises is important, and I promised my kids that I'm going to carve pumpkins with them tonight. That's why I did ask Chair if we were going to stick it to 2 hours. So I don't see any urgency here. This is going to exist on Monday as well, and so I would move to adjourn, and I hope we all agree to take this up on Monday.
Just before, I hear that movement. Mr. Bains, I had excused you, but I'll repeat it because I think you stepped away, and I didn't want to miss the flow here. And I did, of course, say you were free to get up and stretch your legs. I do want to thank you, Mr. Bains, for your testimony and participation and appearing before this committee again today. I also appreciate your willingness to respond in writing to any additional questions that we might have, and should that happen, the clerk will reach out to you. So you are excused, sir, and I appreciate again your time tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity for me to help answer all the questions that were posed.
Thank you again.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Very good. And I have a motion to adjourn from Mr. Erskine-Smith, which is non-debatable. I'll ask the clerk to call the question, please.
Oui.
Monsieur Drouin.
En faveur.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Khalid.
Yes.
Ms. Yip.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Perkins.
No.
Mr. Stewart.
No.
Madame Saint-Clair de Gagné. No. Mr. Cannings.
Yes.
5-5.
6 yeas, 4 nays.
Oh, okay.
This
Meeting's
meeting
adjourned.
is adjourned. We'll see you back here Monday. Happy Halloween.
Okay. Well, you guys saw that. Basically, it was that NDP Santa Claus guy that swayed the vote there. If he said he wanted to stay and debate that motion, then they would have kept going for another half hour probably, because I agree with MP Perkins and I agree with the bloc, Madame Saint-Clair de Gagné. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name properly, but both of those amendments are good. I'd like to see those 4 witnesses come to committee. So that's it for this. And I'll just repeat one more time if anybody was not listening before, or I know sometimes, you guys mute the stream because of who's talking. We won't be live tomorrow. We won't be live Friday. We're basically kind of taking an early weekend off here because, I hardly ever do that. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. I will try and get some clips out over the weekend and stuff from committees and anything else that I missed on Thursday. I'll try to get back to it on Saturday, hopefully. But basically, just try to take a couple days off, guys. Try to just not worry about politics for a bit because it's been so much overloading with all the corruption and all the scandals. And, just try to have a good little couple days. And if you can do whatever during Halloween and stuff, do what you guys like to do. And appreciate everybody tuning in. As you guys know, I love you guys in the chat. You guys are awesome. You guys make it so easy to do this and watch politics. You guys are awesome to chat with. So I will miss you guys over the next few days, but we'll return back on Monday for sure with the lives. And if you want to check back on the channel, there'll be some clips coming out over the weekend. So that's it for that. Have a great rest of your weekend, guys. Enjoy, and we'll call it here. Cheers, everybody.